3 alien girls invited me to a party. When I entered, they were all alien women. The invitation had arrived on a Tuesday, which Lucas had always considered the least dramatic day of the week, and therefore the one most likely to ambush a person. It appeared on the station's social board between a notice about a faulty pressure seal in Corridor 7 and an advertisement for a meditation class that promised, with what Lucas felt was considerable optimism, to bring inner peace to any species with a nervous system. The invitation itself was brief. A time, a location, 3 names: Saya, Myra, Elen, followed by the words "come if you want." There will be food in the cheerful, unpretentious style of people who consider a party self-explanatory and find formal invitations faintly suspicious. He had accepted within the hour, not because he was particularly enthusiastic about parties, but because he had no strong feelings against them, and because the 3 of them had made the preceding 3 weeks considerably more interesting than the 3 weeks before them had been. He had met Saya first, in the compound's recreational area, where she had been reading something on a handheld screen, and he had sat at the adjacent table and spilled his coffee in a way that had required an apology. She had accepted it with a composure that suggested she was familiar with accidents and did not hold them against their authors. Myra had appeared 2 days later, introduced by Saya with the offhand ease of someone adding a variable to an equation they consider settled. Elen had arrived the week after that, quieter than the other 2, with the focused attention of a person who prefers to understand a situation before participating in it. The 3 of them together had a quality that Lucas had not immediately found a word for. They were young, or had the manner of it, that particular ease of people who have not yet developed the adult habit of carefully managing their own enjoyment. Their conversations moved quickly and changed direction without warning and occasionally covered subjects he could not follow, not because of any language barrier. The station's translation protocols were thorough enough that miscommunication required real effort, but because their frames of reference were simply different from his in ways that were interesting rather than frustrating. He had found their company uncomplicated. He had found, somewhat to his surprise, that he looked forward to it. Kepler Station was not a small place. It occupied a stable orbit above a gas giant whose name in the local astronomical catalog was a sequence of numbers that nobody used, because the crew of the first survey vessel to document it had named it Gerald, and Gerald had stuck with the stubborn persistence of informal things. The station itself housed approximately 4,000 residents at any given time: researchers, engineers, traders, transit passengers, and a rotating population of people whose professional categories resisted easy summary. It had 7 residential sectors, 3 commercial levels, a medical bay that was better equipped than most planetary facilities, and a recreational area on the 4th level that had, over the years, accumulated the particular atmosphere of a place where people go when they are not working and do not want to think about it. Lucas had been assigned to Kepler 14 months ago for reasons that had seemed administratively straightforward at the time, and had since revealed themselves to be considerably more complicated, in the way of most things that begin as paperwork. He was a systems analyst, which on a station of this size meant that he spent a meaningful portion of his time looking at data that described other data and writing reports that would be read by people who would use them to generate further reports. He was competent at this. He was also, by the end of his first year, quietly aware that competence and engagement are related but not identical. The 3 weeks with Saya, Myra, and Elen had been engaging. He arrived at the location on the invitation, a residential unit in Sector 4, not far from his own, at the indicated time, which was 7 in the evening by station standard. He had changed his shirt, which he considered an appropriate level of social effort, for an event described as *come if you want. He had also, in a moment of optimism he was already beginning to revise, brought a bottle of something that had been recommended to him in the commercial level as universally appreciated, which he suspected was the kind of claim that required a very flexible definition of the word universally. He knocked. There was a pause of approximately 3 seconds, the specific duration, he would later reflect, of someone deciding how to open a door, and then the door opened, and Lucas experienced what he would subsequently describe to himself, in the privacy of his own careful internal language, as a recalibration. The woman standing in the doorway was Saya. He was certain of this. The face was the face he recognized. The eyes were the same dark and attentive eyes. The slight tilt of the head was the same tilt she used when she found something mildly interesting and was deciding whether to say so. The ears long, tapered, curving to a point in the manner that had initially struck him as unusual, and had since simply become part of how he pictured her, framed a face that was, in all its features, familiar to him. The rest of her was a significant addition to his existing information. She was taller than he had registered, or was carrying herself differently, or both. Her bearing had the quality of someone who has decided, at some point prior to this moment, exactly how much space they are entitled to occupy, and has been comfortable with the answer ever since. She was looking at him with an expression he recognized as warmth, and an expression he could not quite classify as something else, something that lived just beneath the warmth, and was watching his face with what he could only describe as prepared interest. He was still processing this when the two women behind her accomplished the same thing simultaneously. Myra was leaning against the wall to Saya's left with the relaxed posture of someone who has been waiting for something to happen and is pleased to find that it is happening on schedule. Ellen was standing slightly further back, as was her habit, but she was watching him with the particular focused attention she usually reserved for things she had already decided were worth understanding. They were both, like Saya, entirely themselves and entirely something more than he had previously accounted for, and the combined effect of all three of them in the same doorway produced in Lucas the specific internal experience of a man who has just discovered that the map he has been using is both accurate and incomplete. He was aware that his expression was communicating something. He was also aware that whatever it was communicating, all three of them found it satisfying. Saya said his name. She said it with the warm directness of someone who considers the social distance between two people a thing to be crossed rather than maintained, and she stepped back from the door with the unhurried ease of a host who has been expecting her guest and finds his arrival, even at its exact scheduled time, pleasantly confirmed. "You brought something," Myra said, looking at the bottle in his hand with an interest that was either genuine or very well performed. "Is that the one from the commercial level? The one the vendor describes as universally appreciated?" "It is," Lucas said. "He told you everyone likes it," Ellen said from the back of the room. "He did. He tells everyone that. I'm beginning to understand that." Saya took the bottle from him with a kind of practiced courtesy that managed to be both gracious and faintly amused, and Lucas stepped across the threshold into the apartment, and the door closed behind him, and the evening, the actual evening, the one that bore no particular resemblance to the one he had been anticipating, began. The apartment had the lived-in quality of a place that had been arranged by people who knew what they wanted and had not consulted any official guidance on the subject. There were things on the walls that Lucas could not immediately categorize, not quite art, not quite instruments, occupying the specific middle territory of objects that have a purpose their owner understands and their guest does not. The lighting was warm and slightly lower than station standard, which either indicated a preference for atmosphere or a species-level relationship with light intensity that he had not previously considered, and was now adding to the list of things he was quietly assembling. Something was cooking. Whatever it was smelled of something he had no direct reference for, but which his nervous system had apparently already decided it approved of, which he found both reassuring and slightly presumptuous of his nervous system. Myra had claimed the larger of the two chairs with the ease of someone exercising a right established long before this evening, and was watching him take in the room with the open enjoyment of a person who finds other people's adjustment periods genuinely entertaining. Ellen had returned to a position near the far counter, where several things were arranged in a sequence that suggested preparation rather than clutter. Saya moved through the space with the unhurried confidence of a host who has thought about the evening in advance and is now simply allowing it to happen. Lucas sat where he was indicated, on a low seat that was more comfortable than it appeared, and accepted the drink that Saya produced from somewhere to his left with the grateful automaticity of a man who has decided that forward momentum is, at present, his best available strategy. The drink was extraordinary. He looked at the glass. "It's fine," Myra said, reading his expression with an accuracy he found slightly unsettling. "It won't do anything to you that you'll object to." That's a very specific reassurance. It's a very specific drink. He took another sip. It tasted the way a clear evening feels, not a description he would have considered himself capable of producing before this moment, but the only one that fit. He decided not to examine it further and instead examined the room, which was the kind of decision a person makes when they are trying to appear more composed than they are. "You have questions," Saya said. She had settled into a seat across from him with the ease of someone completing a familiar action, and she was looking at him with the expression he had been trying to classify since the doorway. The one that lived just beneath the warmth and watched his face with prepared interest. "Several," Lucas said. "Ask whichever one is loudest." He considered this. The loudest question was the obvious one, the one that had been reorganizing itself into various phrasings since the moment the door opened, and he had been avoiding it not because he was unwilling to ask it, but because he was trying to find the version of it that was most accurate and least ungracious. The problem was that all the accurate versions were also somewhat ungracious, because the question itself was essentially asterisk "you were considerably different 3 weeks ago, and I would like to understand the mechanism asterisk," which was true but not, he felt, his finest conversational opening. "You look different," he said, which was the least ungracious version he had managed and also, he was aware, the least informative. "Do we?" Myra said, in the tone of someone who has heard this before and continues to find it adequately amusing. "You know you do." "We know," Ellen said from the counter, with the particular economy of someone who considers confirmation a complete sentence. Saya tilted her head in the way she had, the slight angle that meant she was deciding whether to say the thing she was thinking or a polished version of it. She appeared to decide on the thing she was thinking. "We're older than we look," she said, "when we look younger." Lucas processed this. That's either a very simple explanation or a very complex one. "Both," Ellen said. "Our biology is somewhat flexible," Saya said, with the air of someone describing a feature rather than a peculiarity. "In certain conditions, the station's environment, the light cycles, the atmospheric composition, the particular mix of pressures that human-optimized habitats maintain, it reads to our systems as a younger state. An earlier register. We revert a little. It's not deliberate. It's the way some materials expand and contract with temperature." Lucas sat with this for a moment. He was a systems analyst. He understood the principle of environmental variables producing state changes in a system that was designed for different baseline conditions. He understood it very well, actually. He simply had not previously applied it to people. "So 3 weeks ago," he said slowly, "you were." "Younger," Myra said. "Relatively. Environmentally. The corridor between the recreational area and this sector has a slightly different atmospheric mix, closer to our native baseline. Spending time there, we stabilize closer to what you saw." She paused. "It's a bit like asking why you look different in cold air than in warm. The answer is, you do, and the reasons are physiological, and it isn't anyone's fault." "I wasn't assigning fault." "No, but you were assembling a framework for what happened, and I wanted to give you one that was accurate before you finished building an inaccurate one." This was, Lucas thought, one of the most considerately delivered pieces of information he had ever received, and he said so, which made Myra look at him with an expression he could not fully read, but which seemed to revise something in her assessment of him in a direction he hoped was positive. The cooking smell deepened. Hélène moved things from the counter to a low table near the center of the room, with the quiet efficiency of someone performing a task they have done many times, and the arrangement that emerged was of food in containers that he could not identify by sight, but which continued to make very good arguments through the medium of smell. There were things that appeared to be vegetables and things that appeared to be proteins and things that did not appear to be anything he had a category for, which he placed in the same mental folder as the wall objects and the drink, a folder that was growing at a rate he found interesting rather than alarming. "You can ask about the food," Hélène said, not looking up. "Is it safe for me?" "Yes. We checked your nutritional profile from the station's medical registry when we sent the invitation." Lucas paused with a piece of something halfway to his mouth. "You checked my medical records. Your nutritional compatibility index," Hélène said, with a precision that suggested she considered this a meaningful distinction. "It's public information for exactly this reason. Shared meals between species require preparation. It would have been poor hosting to invite you and then poison you accidentally. Or deliberately," Myra added helpfully. "Thank you," Lucas said. Both clarifications were useful. He ate the thing. It was excellent. He was not sure what it was, and he had decided, somewhere between the doorway and the drink, that this was an acceptable condition for the evening, not knowing precisely what things were and finding them excellent anyway. It was, he reflected, a more comfortable position than he would have predicted for himself an hour ago, which said something either about the food or the company or the drink that tasted like a clear evening, and he was willing to credit all three equally. The music, which he had not noticed beginning, had a time signature he could not count. He tried twice, gave up, and found that once he stopped counting it was actually very pleasant, which seemed like a lesson of some kind that he was not quite ready to articulate. Saya was watching him with the warm, prepared expression. "Better," she said. "Considerably," he said, and meant it in more directions than one. The evening had settled into itself the way good evenings do, not with a dramatic shift, but with a gradual loosening, the way a knot releases when you stop pulling against it, and simply allow the tension to find its own resolution. The food was gone, or mostly gone, and the containers had been moved to the counter with the casual efficiency of people who have an established system for these things, and execute it without discussion. Lucas had, at some point he could not precisely identify, stopped sitting like a man who was paying careful attention to his own posture, and started sitting like a man who was simply sitting. Myra had noticed this. She noticed most things, and her relationship with the things she noticed was one of active appreciation rather than passive observation. She was the kind of person who collected moments of human adjustment the way some people collect objects, not acquisitively, but with a genuine pleasure in the thing itself. Lucas had become aware of this quality in her over the preceding weeks without fully understanding it, and was now, with the benefit of better lighting and a completed meal, understanding it more thoroughly. "You're more relaxed than you were an hour ago," she said, with the tone of someone reporting a fact they find pleasing. "I am," Lucas agreed. "Was it the food, the drink, or the explanations?" "The explanations helped," he said. "The food helped more." Hélène, who had returned to her preferred position with the focused stillness of someone who had decided the evening, was proceeding correctly, and required no further intervention from her, made a sound that Lucas had come to recognize as her version of quiet satisfaction. It was a very small sound. It communicated a great deal. Saya refilled his glass with the unhurried ease of someone who has been watching the level and has decided the moment is right, which Lucas found to be an excellent quality in a host and said so, which made Saya look at him with an expression that was warm and slightly evaluative in equal measure, the expression of someone updating a prior estimate. The conversation had moved, as conversations do when people have stopped performing their respective roles and started simply occupying the same space, into territory that was both more ordinary and more interesting than the territory they had started in. They had covered, in no particular order, the peculiarities of Kepler Station's atmospheric management system, which Ellen had opinions about that were technical and pointed. The question of whether Gerald was a good name for a gas giant, which Myra felt it was, on the grounds that a planet that large deserved a name that nobody would take seriously, and therefore nobody would argue about, and a discussion of the station's social board that had begun with the meditation class advertisement, and had expanded into a broader analysis of the optimism required to promise inner peace to any species with a nervous system. Some species have too, Myra said, at a point when the conversation had arrived there naturally. Nervous systems, a primary and a secondary. The secondary one handles threat response mostly. Some researchers think it evolved separately. Does yours? Lucas asked, and then considered whether he had asked too directly, and then decided that directness had been working adequately well for the past hour, and there was no reason to abandon it now. No, Myra said. One system, standard configuration. We're not that exotic. She said this with a faint irony that acknowledged, without belabouring, that the evening had already covered a reasonable amount of ground in the category of things he had not previously known about them. The ears, Lucas said, because the conversation had arrived at the kind of comfortable altitude where the question was available, and it would have been more conspicuous to avoid it than to ask it. All three of them looked at him. The look was not unfriendly. It was the look of people who have been waiting, with patience and some entertainment, for a specific door to open. What about them? Saya said. I noticed them when we met. I didn't ask. Why not? He thought about this honestly. Because you didn't seem to require me to, he said, and because I wasn't sure whether it was a question that was welcome. Saya considered this with a slight head tilt. It's welcome, she said. It's usually one of the first things people ask. The fact that you didn't is something we noticed. Myra kept waiting for it, Ellen said, with the tranquil accuracy of someone who considers factual reporting a form of affection. I did, Myra confirmed, without embarrassment. The first day and the second day. By the third day I had decided you were either very polite or operating with a very broad definition of standard human variation. Both, Lucas said, roughly equally. The ears were, he had concluded early on, simply a feature. The same category of feature as the particular way Saya tilted her head or the way Ellen's attention sharpened when something interested her. They were long, tapered, curving to their points with the clean geometry of something that had been arrived at over a very long time by a process that knew what it was doing. He had filed them, after the first week, in the same place he filed everything that was unfamiliar and present, and not causing any problems. The folder labeled asterisk noted, revisit later. He was revisiting now. They're useful, Ellen said, which was her way of opening a subject that she considered had been handled with adequate indirectness and could now be handled directly. The range is wider than human auditory capacity, significantly wider. We hear things you don't. Like what? Like the harmonic the ventilation system produces when the pressure differential between sectors 3 and 4 shifts. It happens every 40 minutes. It sounds like a chord. Lucas listened. The ventilation system produced no sound he could detect. What kind of chord? Ellen considered. Unresolved, she said. That explains something about working in Sector 3, Lucas said. I always feel slightly unsettled when I'm there, and I've never been able to identify why. Now you know, Ellen said, with the satisfaction of someone who has provided a useful answer to a question that had not previously been correctly formulated. The music was still playing. Lucas had long since abandoned the attempt to count its time signature and had arrived, somewhere during the second glass of the clear evening drink, at the position that some music is meant to be inhabited rather than analyzed, and that this was probably true of more things than just music. Myra had said, when he mentioned this, that he was either having a genuine insight or the drink was better than they had calibrated, and that both outcomes were fine with her. "Can I ask something else?" Lucas said. "You've been asking things for an hour," Myra said. "You don't need to announce them anymore." "Fair. The invitation, come if you want. There will be food, was that the whole intention? Or was there a reason it was the three of you and one of me?" The three of them exchanged something. Not a look exactly, more the quality of a shared awareness briefly made visible, the kind of communication that happens between people who know each other well enough that the full version of an exchange can occur in the space where a glance would be. Lucas had noticed this quality between them before in the recreational area and had filed it in the *noted * folder. He was not surprised to find it still there. Saya spoke. "We liked your company," she said, with the directness she had used since the doorway. "The past 3 weeks were easy, in the way that things are easy when you're not performing. We don't always find that easily." "The station has 4,000 residents," Myra said. "Most of them are very interested in us in a way that is more about us being interesting than about us specifically. You were interested in the conversation. You spilled your coffee and apologized as if you'd committed a minor administrative error," Ellen said. "And then you sat down and asked Saya what she was reading, and you listened to the answer." "It was an interesting answer," Lucas said. "Yes," Saya said, "but you didn't know that before you asked." He sat with this for a moment. Outside the apartment, Kepler Station continued its patient orbit around Gerald, and the ventilation system produced, every 40 minutes, a chord that only some of the people aboard it could hear, and the social board accumulated its notices and advertisements and invitations, and 4,000 people moved through their various evenings in the ways that 4,000 people do. Inside the apartment, the lighting was warm and lower than station standard, and the drink was gone, and the music continued in its uncountable time, and Lucas found that he was not in any particular hurry to be anywhere else, which was, he thought, a very clean feeling and one he intended to hold carefully. The evening had reached the hour that has no precise name, not late enough to require acknowledgement, not early enough to ignore. The music had shifted at some point into something quieter, a register that asked less of its listeners and gave more, and Lucas had stopped noticing it in the way you stop noticing a good temperature, which is to say it had become part of the condition of the room rather than a feature of it. Myra had moved at some point from the large chair to the floor beside it, which she had done with the unself-conscious ease of someone for whom the floor is simply another available surface, and was sitting with her back against the chair's side, and her attention moving between the room and something interior that she visited occasionally, and returned from with a slightly different expression each time. Ellen had made tea. This had happened with so little ceremony that Lucas had simply found a cup in his hand at some point, and had accepted it with the instinct of a man who has learned, over the course of this particular evening, that the things produced from this kitchen are worth trusting before they are understood. The tea was dark and had a quality he could not name, not bitter, not sweet, but something that sat in the category adjacent to both and was better for not belonging to either. He drank it and felt the specific warmth of something that has been made with attention. "This is good," he said. "I know," Ellen said, which was not arrogance but simply accuracy, and he had come to appreciate the difference. Saya was sitting with one leg folded beneath her in the way she had, a posture that managed to be both entirely relaxed and entirely composed, and she was looking at the middle distance with the expression of someone who is present and also thinking, which Lucas had noticed was her default state. She was always doing both, always here and somewhere thoughtful simultaneously, and the combination had the effect of making her attention, when it arrived fully on a person, feel like something substantial. It arrived on him now. "You're quieter than you were an hour ago," she said. "I'm full," he said, "and it's a comfortable quiet. Those are different things." "They are, both are true." She accepted this with a slight nod, and the room held the comfortable quiet he had described for a moment, which was the kind of moment that would have felt awkward an hour ago and now felt like the natural pause between movements in a piece of music. Necessary, load-bearing, part of the structure rather than an absence in it. It was Myra who broke it, because Myra had a relationship with comfortable silences that was affectionate but not deferential. "You've been assembling something," she said, looking at him from the floor with the directness she deployed, when she had decided that indirection would take longer than the evening had left. "Since the third question. You ask one, you absorb it, you file it, and then you go quiet for a while and come back with a more complicated one. You're in the quiet phase, which means a complicated one is coming." Lucas considered denying this and decided against it on the grounds that it was entirely accurate. "I've been thinking about the past 3 weeks," he said, and I've been trying to work out whether I missed something obvious or whether what I missed was genuinely not visible." "The second one," Ellen said, from the counter, where she was doing something with the tea equipment that appeared to be more organizational than necessary, but which she seemed to find satisfying. "Mostly the second one," Saya said, with the honesty of someone who respects a person enough not to give them the entirely comfortable version. "Some of it you could have noticed if you'd been looking for it. Most people are looking for it. You weren't. I was looking at the conversation." "Yes." He turned the cup in his hands. The tea was still warm. Outside the apartment, Kepler Station hummed in its register. Not the ventilation cord that Ellen could hear and he couldn't, but the deeper, broader hum of a structure keeping 4,000 people alive in the middle of nothing in particular. A hum so constant it had long since stopped being a sound and become a condition, the way gravity becomes a condition. He had lived inside that hum for 14 months. He had stopped hearing it after the first week. He wondered now how many other things he had filed under asterisk condition that were actually worth listening to. "The station," he said. "The atmospheric difference between the recreational area and this sector. You spend time in the corridor between them deliberately." The three of them exchanged the shared awareness quality again, the brief visibility of a longer conversation. It was Myra who answered, and she answered with the particular tone she used for things that were true and also slightly inconvenient. "Not deliberately," she said, "but not accidentally either. We like the recreational area. The light is better. The people are varied. You can have conversations there that you can't have in the sector corridors, where everyone is going somewhere and doesn't want to be interrupted. You had one with me. We had several with you." "About literature," Ellen said, "and atmospheric modeling and the administrative history of the station's waste reclamation system, which you know an unreasonable amount about." "It came up in a report," Lucas said. "I found it interesting." "That," Myra said, pointing at him with the precision of someone identifying a specimen, "is exactly what we mean." He laughed. It was a genuine laugh, the kind that arrives before the decision to produce it, and it changed the quality of the room slightly, added something to it. The way a specific instrument entering a piece of music adds not just its own sound but a new relationship between all the sounds already present. Myra looked pleased. Ellen looked from the counter, as though she was not looking pleased but was in fact pleased. Saya smiled with the unhurried completeness of someone who had been waiting for precisely this and found the timing satisfactory. The night continued. They talked about Gerald, about the survey team that had named it, about the ongoing and entirely unresolved academic debate about whether informal planetary names should be standardized or preserved, about the fact that there was apparently a second planet in the system that the survey team had named Gerald's brother, which had been quietly removed from official charts and just as quietly reinstated 3 times. They talked about what it meant to live on a station rather than a planet, the specific psychology of a ceiling that is also a floor for someone else, the way long-term station residents develop a different relationship with the concept of outside. Ellen had thoughts about this that were precise and somewhat surprising. Myra had thoughts that were less precise and considerably more entertaining. Saya listened to both and added, at intervals, the thing that connected them, which was her particular gift, not synthesis exactly, but the identification of the thread that was already there. Lucas found himself talking about the reports, not the content of them, not the data describing data, but the experience of them, the 14 months of competent, engaged, largely unremarkable professional existence that had preceded 3 weeks of something that was all three of those things and also, consistently, more. He was not sure why he was saying this. He was saying it because the room was the kind of room where it was available to be said, and because the 3 people in it were the kind of people who would receive it as information rather than complaint. "You've been here 14 months, Saya said, and this is the first evening like this one." "Yes, that seems like a long time." "It seemed like an appropriate amount of time," Lucas said. "While I was in it, it seems longer from here." This was true in a way that he was only finishing understanding as he said it, that the perspective available from inside a period of time and the perspective available from just outside it are different instruments measuring the same thing, and both readings are accurate, and neither is complete without the other. 14 months of competent unremarkability had been, from the inside, simply his life on the station. From here, from this warm room with its unnameable food and its uncountable music and its 3 people who heard chords in the ventilation system and checked his nutritional compatibility index before inviting him to dinner. It had the quality of a very long hallway that had been perfectly comfortable to walk through and had led, eventually, to a door worth opening. He said this, or a version of it, less neatly than he had thought it. Myra looked at him for a moment. "That was almost poetic," she said, "for a man who finds the administrative history of waste reclamation interesting." "I contain multitudes." "Clearly," she said, and the word carried, beneath its irony, something that was not irony at all. It was Ellen who noticed the time first, because Ellen noticed most things first and reported them without editorial. "It's late," she said, with the directness of someone for whom this is a complete sentence. It was late. Lucas registered this with the mild surprise of someone who has lost track of time in the specific way that only happens when time has been well used. He set down the cup, empty, and had been for a while, and moved through the process of departure with the slightly reluctant efficiency of someone who knows the right thing to do, and is doing it without being entirely convinced it is the thing they want to do. At the door he paused. It was the same door, different direction, and he was aware of this in a way that felt deliberate without being planned. He turned back to the 3 of them. "The invitation said come if you want," he said. "It did," Saya said. "I want to come again if that's a thing that's available." The 3 of them received this with the composed, unhurried quality they had brought to the entire evening. The quality of people who have thought about more things in advance than they have let on, and who find the present moment arriving, consistently, where they expected it. "Tuesday," Ellen said, "there will be food." He walked back through Kepler Station's corridors with the particular quality of attention of someone who has been quietly rearranged by an evening, and is still in the early stages of understanding the new configuration. The hum of the station was there. It was always there, but he was hearing it tonight in the way you hear something when you have recently been reminded that hearing is a variable, that what arrives and what is received are 2 different quantities, and that the gap between them is not a failure of the signal but an opportunity of the instrument. He passed through the corridor between Sector 4 and the residential block, the one with the slightly different atmospheric mix, the one that was closer to someone else's native baseline. And he breathed it without knowing he was breathing it differently, and somewhere above him and below him, and in all directions simultaneously, Kepler Station held its orbit around Gerald with the patient, unassuming competence of something that has been doing one thing for a very long time and intends to continue, and the ventilation system produced, in a frequency he could not hear, an unresolved chord. and he went home through the hum thinking about Tuesday.